Welcome everybody. I'll just do a 1-minute introduction. This is the second CEVO seminar. And I just want to do thank you some people. First of all, I want to thank CEPR for the organization, and in particular, Mandy Chan. She's been amazing, and we couldn't have this if it were not for her. Then I want to thank again Morten Bennetsen for having this initiative and getting it started, and the whole organizing committee for this. And then thank you very much, Maria, for agreeing to be our second speaker. I'm really looking forward to this. And finally, I want to introduce and thank Bob Gibbons, who's going to be our chair today. It's all yours, Bob.
Thank you, Maria and Morten. Certainly, thank you, Mandy. As we've said before, I'm just figuring out that you're the Rob Shannon of the European Union or something like that. The whole world would not function without you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So, okay. Maria, I think, needs no introduction, so I'm going to introduce this paper and say three quick things. So one is that I was fascinated by hearing Maria's discussion of this, what she was planning to do, and said, could you please come give this even in a very early stage at the NBER meeting, which then didn't happen last month. And so other organizers of this gathering said, let's have Maria talk here. So that's sort of the sourcing, if you want to use the real world term for that. Now, there are two respects in which I thought it was going to be very important for the NBER audience to hear this, and so hence this audience as well. One is substantively. So as you can see here from the title, learning about clarity and credibility and thinking about agile organizations is a whole set of real world, real organization issues that, forgive me, I've worked on these topics, so have many of you, but this is not about the boundary of the firm or pay for performance or the things that we, that are important that we frequently look at. So I love the topic here. I think it's super important. And the last thing I'll say is I really love the method. So as some of you may know that in I think the late 80s, the Journal of Financial Economics started publishing what they called clinical papers under the suggestion of Mike Jensen. And these are, what the JFE was thinking of as case studies, sort of. And they were terrific. Some of them were in financial markets, and some of them were sort of corporate finance organizations papers by Steve Kaplan or George Baker or Kevin Murphy, people like that. And so then George Baker and Ricard Gill wrote a chapter in the Handbook of Organizational Economics on the role of clinical papers in organizational economics, of course, starting from Fisher-Body. And so that's how I see this. I think we need more papers like this. I think they need to be inside the organization rather than thinking about the boundaries and integration and contracting between organizations as well. So I'm super excited, Maria. You have 40 minutes. We will have 2 breaks. There'll be 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. Last 2 procedural things. If you look at the chat, you will see that Morten has kindly listed the homepage, and if you go there, you can get signed up for future invites. And lastly, speaking of the chat, if you would like to ask a question, I'm afraid I'm the dictator today. I'll do random serial dictatorship or something. So if you could please send me a chat or the whole group a chat that indicates the rough topic of your question, I will try and funnel a few of those to Maria when we take our breaks. Maria, thank you so much. You have 40 minutes total.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be able to talk to you, even if it's from home, or even it's better maybe that it's from home, because this allows for a very diverse audience. And as Bob was saying, this is part of a collaboration that started with a bank in 2015. It's been long in the making. I've been talking to some of you about some of it at times. And so this is, I'm really happy that I was, put to actually do this, because there's nothing like a deadline to get you working. So that actually worked that purpose too. So this is what the purpose of the talk is, really to tell you what this transformation is, what this Agile organization does and how they got to it, and a bit provide you the details of how they operate. That's a lot of the clinical aspect of it that Bob was referring to. We collected quite a lot of data, and I also wanted to tell you, some of the data analysis as it is today. It's still very much work in progress, so comments online or offline are super, super welcome. because I'm still digesting all of this stuff personally. All right, so let's see. So, well, first, why Agile, right? What is this whole thing about Agile organizations? And I think there's a number of forces that are taking place and have been going on for a number of years that make this a relevant organizational form to look at because it's growing. One is the environment. So with globalization, digitalization, technology, there's this increase in uncertainty, complexity, volatility, and especially with the digital transformation, there's this feeling that firms need to figure out how to better adapt to customers and have these tools to actually adapt in a much more tailored way. Another thing floating in the air is the engagement crisis. So for many years, there's been this concern that employees are not engaged at work. Everybody has heard about the Gallup polls and how engagement is super low. And so it's this feeling that employees are sort of oppressed in the hierarchy and can't thrive. And this frustration in organizations is not new. So we've all heard about the frustration with Matrix, which is an attempt to have both adaptation and coordination at the same time, but then it creates complexity. In earlier work with Julie, we looked at how firms were trying to flatten and delegate to adapt better to these changing product markets and more competition. So there's been sort of this floating effort of we need to push decision-making down. We need to think about how do we empower workers. So here comes Agile. And this is a title with a question mark. Is this really a new form of organizing? Because there's been things in the past decades that already had a bit of this flavor, right? There's been this growth in self-managed teams. There's these movements of holacracy, what they call teal. This is Laloux's book formulation. Now in OB, they call these less hierarchical organizations. So there's lots of different forms of organizations that are trying to get away from the traditional hierarchy, that are trying to fix the problems that Matrix has been unable to fix or has trouble fixing, or it creates new problems. And one of these movements has been within IT, starting with the Agile Manifesto in 2001. This was a group of people in IT who decided that the way in which IT projects were done was not useful, because they would make this huge plan that would be, in 2 years or in a year from now, we will deliver this new product. So this huge plan with all the complex products, and obviously it was never finished in 1 year. It was never finished on budget. And by the time the product came out, maybe the needs of the market had changed. So they said, look, we need to have a different way of organizing, where we organize we build projects in a more iterative way with small increments. And we don't rely on these big teams with lots of people from across the organization. We actually empower small teams that are able to do as much as possible by themselves. So this is, a bit of the general framework. So this, you see different managerial attempts to actually solve this problem with different forms. Now, and this is a paper, like a survey kind of article I wrote with Eve Does. All of these share the same core principle, which is that it's a system of teams with decision power at the team level. So it's trying to do away with the hierarchy and putting decision power at the team level in mostly multifunctional teams. So this is a picture of this that I like, that McKinsey produced. We're used to this kind of organization on the left-hand side, which is a hierarchy, right? You have a top-down hierarchy with different levels, decision makers at the top, making decisions, telling people what to do, bureaucracy, etc. And then this is drawn as a functional hierarchy. You have each of these colors would be a department. You could have IT, you could have marketing, you could have another department here. And what would happen traditionally in these organizations is if the marketing person has an idea, we want to do something new, they would call their manager. They'll have a meeting, the manager would then say, oh, that's a good idea. Let's call the IT people to see if they can do that. They call the IT manager, have another meeting, then the manager says, wait, I have to ask my people. He would go down, have a meeting with the underlings in the IT hierarchy, and then iterate back. So too many meetings and a lot of time to actually decide this. And a lot of frustration, and my manager doesn't know what needs to be done, etc. So the new form of organizing has changed to what's on the right-hand side. So this is now the organization is a system of teams, where now in each team, the people from the different functions sit together. They have a project and they can decide what to do, what to do with direction from the center, but everything around how to do it, how to organize, come up with new ideas, and in Agile, build iteratively these projects. So it's a radical change. The idea of top-down hierarchical decision-making disappears. Now, this is teams that are multifunctional with people with different expertise that work together. They work in a system, and what's clearly disappear here is all the middle managers disappear. There's some management or some people at the top of this kind of system of teams that set direction. Their role is more strategic decision setting, but it's a radically different paradigm of how to organize. And in management theory, they've talked about more mechanistic and organic organization. So this has more the idea of this is an organism that adapts, and it adapts to the changing environment. All right. So what do I do in this? What this paper is working with a large bank. This is it's ING in the Netherlands. So we have a form of insider econometrics, to use Casey and Kathy's terminology, but it's one firm. So it's one large bank that went through a very large transformation, which I argue is the first of its kind, in the sense that a lot of agile firms are firms that are restricted to IT. Many of them were born agile or were born in one of these alternative forms. They transformed from a traditional functional hierarchy to an agile organization. And I'll tell you many more details of how they did that. And so the way I'm thinking about this is that now I have this system of teams. At the head office, I'm gonna have 300 teams that are now like mini organizations with people from all the functions sitting in them. I ran a survey for 5 periods between 2015 and 2017, which I'll show you. It's a detailed survey of life inside the team. So with this questionnaire, I can try to say something about drivers of performance, life inside the team, and how things evolved over time. Again, there's the data. There was also a lot of field work. So we did interviews. We went a couple of times and I've been in touch with them since. In fact, I invited some of them to join this call. I don't know if some of them are here. In fact, this gave rise to a case study. So if you're interested in more details about the transformation itself, this is an INSEAD case study that I wrote with Lucia del Carpio and Yves Doz, which details the transformation. And actually it's a business school case study, so if you're interested in teaching it, I'm also happy to tell you more about it offline. I think it's a great case. All right, so what do we do? So something important to know is that this is different from Ichnowski and Shaw's work or Bloomsadan and Van Reenen, in the sense that here is one firm. So management practice are held constant, HRM systems are held constant. What I'm going to look is how this life inside the team evolves with these things. And in fact, I'm going to focus more on the softer aspects of organizations, or what Andrea and Pauter would call, some aspects of what you call organizational capital, the clarity, credibility ideas in Gibbons and Henderson, but it's really the softer aspects of organizations, because incentives, everything else is constant for all my teams. I'm going to provide this rich description with the data and the case studies of how this new organizational form looks like. And what I think is a nice thing about this paper too is that this is not a simple production, right? I'm going to have people dealing with creating mortgage products, private banking products, credit cards, etc. These are knowledge workers. Now, the whole list I put up here, I think good things of the paper, but also are its downfalls. This is going to be hard to measure performance. It's a complex production. I cannot say anything about the interaction of these things with incentives. So there's lots of things I cannot say, but I think I'll convince you that there's lots I can say. There's a lot of data that I collected, so a lot I could tell you about. I'm going to give you some preview here, and depending on how we do with time, I'll just focus on some things more than others as the talk evolves. So what I can do is that I can track the evolution from this organization from inception. So my survey started a month after these people started working Agile, and I followed them for over a year and a half. I have 5 periods, and we'll see that certain variables improve, others don't improve, and I have very different evolutions for different kinds of variables. Then I can look at what drives performance and what is the importance of these different soft dimensions that I'll be measuring. Things like different dimensions of what I think are related to clarity, trust, culture in the organization, quality of communication, and dimensions of agile design. In a nutshell, I think that what I call clarity variables is what dominates, but you'll see how you interpret the results. And well, I can say some things about what drives performance. Another nice thing is that I surveyed the Agile teams, but I also surveyed people that remained in a functional hierarchy in the firm. So HR and finance did not change to Agile at the beginning, at least for this time period. And so I can compare, are the things that matter for Agile the same things that matter for a non-Agile part of the organization? Are the correlates the same? Because you would imagine that trust matters in both settings. And then I also survey different people so that I can see whether everybody has the same assessment of what's going on, not just people within the team, but also outside the team. So this is a quick arch of the kind of stuff that I can see with the data that we collected. So let me tell you about a bit more details about the bank transformation, and then I'll take questions on the sort of structure of the firm before I tell you more about the data. So again, this is ING Netherlands. It is a large bank, the largest bank in the Netherlands, and they started the transformation at the head office. So think about the head office is the people creating products, thinking how to bring them to market, working on the digital, on all the digital side of the organization, as well as the product development part of the organization. What I think was unique, as I said before, is that it combines not just DevOps, which is the IT part, which already in a lot of IT you would have people from development and operations together. Here you add on the marketing people, the product people. So they're working in the same team, product people with IT employees. And they started the transformation. This was 3,000 employees in this core organization. And this is a bank. So it's not the place where you would think naturally, oh, this is a very agile. It's not very agile, at least stereotypically in the way we think about it. Their goal, their stated goal with this transformation was to increase the efficiency, time to market, that is how they bring fast products to the market and add value, and the engagement of employees. So let me give you a bit more about the context. They felt in 2015 that with low interest rates and a saturated market in the Netherlands, in order to grow, they needed to think about new ways to attract customers. And in particular, they saw breathing down their neck, both fintech and other digital innovators like Apple starting to enter the banking and the payments systems world. But also, and I think this is a beautiful realization, they said, look, clients that come to us, come to a bank, it's like it takes forever to open to get a mortgage, forever to open a bank account, and then they go and deal with Amazon or Apple or Netflix, where things are easy and fast. And if we don't change, our customers are going to start going for these other competitors very easily. So we need to be able to provide products that are as easy as what they experience in other parts of their lives. And to do that, we need great IT people that are able to deliver that. And no great IT person wants to come and work for a boring bank. So we need to change how we organize to be able to create these products and to attract good talent. So this was the sort of rationale of the change. And this is what they did. They visited a number of organizations and to get inspiration of what was going on outside banking in terms of organizing. And they went to Spotify and they basically replicated a lot of what's the Spotify model, which is one way of organizing, to the point that they took some of the terminology, etc. There's a lot of jargon often associated with many transformations, but Agile is one. But in the end, this is sort of to see very simple, relatively simple. So now there's 3,000 people that we have in the head office are going to be distributed or broken down into 13 tribes. A tribe is sort of products that are self-contained. So a tribe would be payment services or payment systems. Another tribe would be mortgages. Another tribe would be private banking. So within the tribe, it's a product that's developed. In this tribe, there's going to be teams. They call squads. And these teams are 8 to 10 people, multifunctional, and they can deliver the product by themselves. So a team in payment services would be the classic credit card team. And the classic credit card team needs to be able to come up with ideas on how to approach and sell this product, how to deliver it to the market, how to code it in the app, how to integrate with the systems of the bank. So it needs to be self-contained to be able to work on this product by itself. Heading each tribe, there's going to be tribe leads. So the remaining real a position that actually still only manages is the tribe lead. But think about this, we have 13 tribes leads for 3,000 people. So it's not a very hands-on micromanaging job. It's really about setting direction and allowing for coordination across the teams. And each of these squads, each of these teams is going to be multifunctional. And one position they have, there's another coordinator, is the product owner. The product owner is in charge of supporting the coordination within the team, also coordinates with other product owners and with the tribe lead. So it's sort of the point person that goes outside the team to deal with coordination across the organization. Another important position is this coaches. So as you can imagine, this requires a change in mindset of how we operate, because now we don't have a manager that tells us, okay, you do this or you do that, that makes decisions for the team. The team needs to come up together with what do we do, how do we actually deliver the purpose that we're in charge of. And this requires, there will be naturally, interpersonal conflict, issues between the individuals, and that's what they have an Agile coach for. So the role of the Agile coach is to support the teams, especially help support the culture, help support the interpersonal issues that the team has. And another, I'll say this one last, another position that's created as this chapter lead. Chapter lead is someone working in a team who'd be responsible for coordinating skill across teams. For example, there could be a Java chapter. So the chapter lead is in charge of mentoring people to develop their skills, knowing where to allocate the skills of a person into the different teams, but it's coordinating across teams on a skill. So the last thing I'll say on this is this: you have these multifunctional teams that are empowered to work from their own, and everybody now within these teams, except everybody within these teams, is actually doing something. You don't have anybody who's a decision maker, or everybody's either coding, coming up with product ideas. So the idea of the middle managers that actually are in charge of processing decisions is gone. The only person in this picture who doesn't make decisions, only makes decisions or only draws, that is not coding or doing something practical, is the tribe lead. So it also calls these whole questions around what kinds of skills are demanded here or are necessary here, and the role of people within a career. So let me stop here because I spoke a lot, and I'm happy to take questions.
That's just perfect. We're at just the right time for the first of two breaks. So I'm going to give you three questions from the chat, and I'm going to combine the first two of them, one from Yossi Spiegel and the second from Steve Tadelis, and then I'll get to one from John Van Reenen. So to combine the Yossi and Steve questions, you're having, understandably, what one might describe as a clarity issue with the audience that is a small version of the clarity issue in the firm. So let me be specific. Were I on the receiving end of these beautiful pictures as an employee at the bank, I would be unclear about what exactly the details are intended, and also about what exactly they will play out as, perhaps different from intended. So Yossi had in his head, oh wait, there's M form versus U form, is that what we're doing? And an employee could have those questions. And Steve had in his head, oh, I've been in organizations with dotted line reporting. How does that relate to what we're doing? So rather than take seriously either of those particular questions, I think the general issue is, you've given us a lot of hints, right? As you talk about culture and soft aspects and trust, those are nowhere in the classical discussions of M form versus U form. They're super important in implementing this. So helping people understand a little bit about how this differs from things that they've heard of before as audience members is good, but you may get there as you talk about how they help the firm understand this stuff. So just a quick reply on those issues.
Yeah. So those are great questions. So U form, M form. So the core organizing principle of these are the teams. U form and M form are different ways of organizing a hierarchy to actually deliver a final good. And U form, you organize them by function. So here we break the function, we take one person from each function and we put them in a team. In M form, it will be some kind of product related, but you will still be in a hierarchy. So that's one big difference. It's that here we're breaking it all and putting in at the local level, and the power resides with the team. The team is deciding how to do the job. There's no decision makers in the middle that help the coordination. The team themselves, so I mean people who actually are working, are deciding those things. which relates to the dotted line thing. So more like a matrix. What is different between these hybrid forms and matrix that are out there? And I think this is trying to address some of the problems that these dotted line organizational forms were trying to solve, which is the world is complicated. So you're still at the bottom, somewhere in the hierarchy, and you have to talk to two people at the top of the hierarchy. Here, you don't talk to two people at the top of the hierarchy. The two people are in the team. You talk to people in your team and you decide together. So the decision-making, the how do we do things, is pushed down to the local level. Is this clear? Clearer?
I think that's clearer and plenty on that. Thank you. Now I'm going to actually pull Heskey Bar Isaac in with John Van Reenen, and John's version of this had a little bit more of an identification spin to it, but who chose and how, what functions went into these teams?
So the big challenge of how to do this is how do you, so even before we get to that, right? How do you break the big functional hierarchy with thousands of people into small teams? So that's the first exercise. And the teams are teams that are as self-contained as possible, that have a purpose. I was giving you an example of the student credit card, the visa, it could be the other forms of payment systems in the payment system service. And then the people who will staff these teams are the people who are necessary, no more than 10 people, who are necessary to deliver the goal of the purpose, right? So the first exercise is take the hierarchy, and even I call it modularize it, create small modules that will allow me to do what the hierarchy was doing. And now staff the modules with whoever's necessary to do that. If I need a Java coder in my student credit card team, I'll put a Java coder, but maybe another team will not have it. Some of these teams are very IT heavy because they deal mostly with IT. Some will have more marketing, product people. So the people going into these teams, the roles going into these teams will depend on the product. And then the organization experimented with telling people where to go and with letting people choose their own team. And in fact, it's something I will measure. So in terms of then how people self-select, even they have a skill, they experimented with both. And in the end, they decided it was better to have people, to tell people where to go, because individuals not always chose teams for the right reasons they felt. So yeah, right now there's more direction on who goes where.
Admirably crisp answers. We have time for two more quick things here. So one of them is from Oriana, talking about who goes where, who comes here at all. So how do you want us to think about people who leave because they don't like Agile and people who come because they do like Agile? And at some point, of course, you run up the flagpole, the clinical paper flag, and say, I'm not trying to estimate the pure effect of this org structure. I'm trying to tell you what happened here now, but there is that selection issue that Oriana raised.
Yes, and it's an important question too, because it interacts with the soft aspect. So let me tell you the story of what happened, and then how I can deal with this later. But what happened in the organization is that they decided they wanted to go into this. And in fact, everybody was in ING was put on mobility. So everybody at ING had to reapply for a job in the new organization. They run hiring panels. And it was I can tell you more another time how the hiring panels were created, because but the hiring panels where people were interviewed on the skills, but also on, do you fit with the new way of organizing, right? A lot of the softer parts are going to be very important. Do you fit in this work? If you've been a manager for the last 10 years of your life, can you actually, even if you're an IT person, can you go back and code? Then you don't fit in this. If you like making decisions and having the status of a manager, you don't fit in this kind of world, because that's not. So the answer is, who went into this? A lot of people from ING, but who had to reapply, and these actually led to a large reduction in headcount. So in terms of performance, or at least the bottom line, there was like a 30 to 40% decrease in headcount in this group. So they were able to do the same with fewer people, and who left was the middle managers. And in fact, they say, look, lots of people who knew a lot about banking, knew a lot about the bank, left because they felt they didn't have a role, or this wasn't for them. So they didn't stay. And then there was some hiring, some new hiring afterwards. But yes, there is a particular kind of person that fits in there. And one of the challenges that's still not resolved but going forward, which is the follow-up question, is what happens to careers? If you think about your career as going up the hierarchy, this doesn't exist here. So you also have to think about career in a different way.
Good. So one more quick question, and then let's go on, presumably to a bigger discussion of culture and soft and trust and clarity, I think, which are the key issues here. But yeah, at one level, this thing is incredibly decentralized with a whole bunch of these tiny little groups running around. The big version of Jacques Cremer's question is, how does anybody coordinate anything? And a specific version of that is, who decides what products to develop?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so above these tribes, there's the board, and the board sets the strategic direction of the bank. Then there's a conversation with the tribes of, okay, how do we actually operationalize this strategic direction? And then the teams in conversation with the tribe decide, well, how do we further operationalize this direction? So in terms of where does who makes decides what to do, it's a conversation, but the overall direction is set from the top. One way in which they talk about this is that the tribe leads and the board state the what, and the teams decide the how, right? So if you say, we want to increase our market share in this particular market, or then okay, we'll do that. And the teams themselves discuss amongst themselves, having all the skills. Okay, how are we going to deliver this final good? But they don't tell them this is exactly what you have to do. So that's the one thing. And then, of course, the challenge here you see is I sometimes call it extreme flattening. This is pushing decisions and a lot of the things that happen higher in the hierarchy to the teams. And that's good for adaptation, but how do you coordinate? And this is the positions that coordinate. The positions that are decided to coordinate are product owners that coordinate across teams, so they know what's happening in the team. They coordinate within the team, but also help coordinate so that there's no duplication. Chapter leads, because you want to make sure that things that are known in one part of the organization come back to another part of the organization. There's meetings between there's a couple of meetings between like chapter lead, agile coach, and that actually are geared towards this integrating and coordinating. But this is one of the challenges, and maybe this is a good segue. I think a lot of this is the culture. So it's how does the culture and communication change so that this coordination can happen in these extreme decentralized teams.
Perfect. And you're at 9 minutes and 50 seconds, so that's perfect. Let me say one last thing, which is there are a whole bunch of other interesting things in the chat. You will love seeing them. Every single one of them is about words we knew from previous literatures. I think the huge contribution of this paper is to start talking about what you're about to talk about, which is the soft side.
Okay, great. So, perfect. Let's go. Again, what are these? There's a multifunctional teams. We had a setting with no pay for performance, no traditional boss, this is all a very complex environment. I'm going to speed through this because you all know this. So I'm just speeding because I think that's where you want me to go. These are teams. So we have a moral hazard coordination problems, all these ideas about soft stuff mattering, credibility and clarity. Do we understand, do we believe what others are going to do? I'm using Gibbons and Henderson taxonomy here because I think it's a very useful way to think about what's going on. At least I found it very useful. And then clarity. Can we understand what the others are promising? So for that, they talk about task knowledge and relational knowledge. So how do I know within this team, multifunctional team, so imagine all the misunderstanding problems that can happen. We're in an innovation world where we can't pre-specify what each of us needs to do. And even if we pre-specify it, how do I know whether a coder's mistake, a problem in the app was the result of a coder not working or not telling me the truth, or actually, I'm a marketing person, I have no idea, I have no way to assess, right? So how do we solve all these work in this multidisciplinary setting? So how do we know what each has to do, and how do we understand? And when things break down, how do we resolve the problem, right? How do we even go back to working efficiently together? So this is where all these softer parts come in. It relates to all of these other literatures, and there's a big literature in social psychology and organizational behavior, etc., looking at these kind of questions. So let me show you what I do. Okay, so we ran 5 surveys between October 15 and February 17. In June 15, the head office had a few teams working Agile. In September, the whole head office was working Agile. In October, we had our first survey. I run surveys of these Agile teams. So think about 300 teams and over 5 periods. Not everybody, half of them responded. Also have surveys of the functional hierarchies, so the stuff that remain constant, and then also these Agile coaches I surveyed in one period, and tribe lead surveys, so that I have different, basically I'm trying to get different points of view of the same problem because all I have is survey data. All right, so I surveyed individuals, but I don't know who the individuals are. I was not able to identify them, for confidentiality reasons. But I asked each person which team do you belong to. So what I'm going to be working on is a team averages. So what's the average response at the team level? For many teams, I have one answer. For many other teams, I have more than one answer. So we have 3,000 team employees organizing around 300 teams, grouping these 13 tribes. And when I go to the team level, I have around 55% team response rate. It's like 67 the first period, average of 55% response rate. Now, before I go to clarity and all these soft measures, also how do we measure performance, right? Here in a setting, I don't have kilograms of soft fruit picked. I don't have minutes on the calls for a call center. I have one guy doing payment systems with an IT person, a marketing person, another person doing omni-channel design, right? So very hard to get it. But I still want to have some sense of how these teams are doing, besides knowing how the soft parts are evolving. So what I did with that is I was bold and I asked them. And so the question is, how good are my answers to this question? So the organization wanted to increase efficiency, to increase engagement, and to increase fast response to the market. So I asked the teams, are you working together efficiently or not? I asked the teams, are you creating value and are you helping respond faster to changing customer requirements? And what I'm going to show you next is I'm going to try to validate these questions. Do these questions hold any information or are they just nothing? And then, of course, I'll ask them about engagement. Here I use the questions that they were using before in the bank already. And so I'll have an engagement question. But I'm trying to work with, and the other important thing here is that what is performance in these teams? Because it could be a multidisciplinary, there could be many dimensions to performance. So the performance variable, and then I'm going to collapse these 3 performance variables into one dimension. So for efficiency, I asked this question, and this is my family. I don't know if you're here, but my son is yelling. This is working from home, live, confinement in Paris. All right, so I asked them this efficiency question. And then what I want to see whether this makes any sense is I want to see whether when I ask a team about efficiency, everybody within the team answers in a similar way. Do they agree when I ask them about efficiency? Do they agree when I ask them about culture? I'll tell you about culture later. Do they agree when I ask them about this time to market? And the answer is yes. So teams, the intra-class correlation, the correlation between answers within a team are actually very highly correlated in these different questions, in each of these questions. But for example, for engagement, they were not very highly correlated. Engagement is an individual characteristic. There's no reason why it has to be correlated. So at least this tells me, look, whatever they're answering in a similar way. The second thing I did is I correlate these answers to the external observer's answers. And I find also that they're highly correlated. So whatever this team efficiency measure is measuring, it's something about performance, I think, that is highly correlated within the team. And also that my tribe lead and my agile coach answer in a similar way, or at least rank teams in a similar way. So that's what I'm going to be using as measures of performance, and I have the same for time to market. So this is a challenge, right? In these complex production functions, is performance multidimensional? And if performance is multidimensional, I care about efficiency, but I also care about value creation, and these are different dimensions of reality, and I care about employee retention. I don't have objective measures, but the subjective measures seem to satisfy a number of criteria that one would want them to satisfy. So now let me go to the soft variables. So here, I like what is nice about this, the data that was collected is that I have 5 periods. I can look at within team variation over time in these variables, and I have a lot of controls. I asked them about a lot of different dimensions of this. So you can say, oh, could trust be correlated with something else? Possibly, but it's within team correlation and actually controlling for all the other things that I'm putting in here. And here's some of the questions I asked. So trust in the team members. How do you have easy communication without many misunderstandings? I'm going to call this my easy communication variable. Is it clear to you what you have to do within the team and relative what you have to do how the division of labor is between teams? I'm going to say something about culture. Also, and then dimensions that are more like about structure. Is your team stable? Because we expect teams that change all the time to have more issues with building a relational contract. And also, how long have you been together? So I'll measure that. And let me tell you, and what I'm going to call clarity are these dimensions. And again, I'll show you them all separately, but this is what I think that is going towards. If you have clear, easy communication, clarity in who does what, this task knowledge, and then alignment with the norms of the organization, I'm going to say, if you answer like an average of these will be my clarity question. Now, let me tell you, say 2 words about culture. So culture is we know it's a very complex thing to measure. And let me tell you how I operationalize this. So the organization has, so how is culture often defined as, or one common definition, as the norms and values that guide behavior. So it turns out that the organization, the bank, built what they call the Orange Code. The Orange Code was an effort done a year or 2 prior to the Agile transformation to think about what are the behaviors that we want everybody to fulfill in the firm. And so this was done with all employees, bottom up. They had these sessions to organize what is the culture and the behaviors that we want to encourage. And these were the 3 main behaviors. You take it on and make it happen, you help others be successful, and you're always 1 step ahead. And I'll show you a little chart of how they put this all into a beautiful, like colorful chart. But in any case, what I'm going to measure as Orange culture is whether you think that your team excels at 2 of these 3 dimensions. I don't have a question for the 3rd one. So when I say culture, Orange code is, do you think that your team excels at taking on challenges and making them happen? Do you do well what is supposed to be done with this behavior? And I have other things. I asked trust in the team. I also asked about trust in the tribe lead. I asked about diversity. I asked about things that have to do with, are the Agile teams well designed? And we go on. So first, some just charts of how things evolve. So this is the evolution of efficiency as I measured it in the team. So we see that from survey 1 to survey 5, the blue line is just average efficiency, just a simple plot of the average. And the red line is within team efficiency evolution. So, it might be that efficiency grows because you kill bad teams and keep good teams. So there's a selection effect. Well, this says actually a lot of the efficiency evolution comes from the within evolution. For response to client needs, there's a bit all over the place. There's no real increase, so it just bounces up and down. So while efficiency increases, the other thing bounces up and down. And then engagement, there's also a very clear increase over time. And I've done this with many of the other variables, and it's a bit all over. It's not clear that everything is trending up, or things respond in different ways, but on average, things got better. So the next thing is, let me take these 3 dimensions of performance and try to see what correlates with them in this conditional within correlation is what I can show you. So, we'll see that the 3 different dimensions respond to different forces. And I have panel data so that I can really look at how do these variables evolve over time within the team, putting in a lot of controls. So first of all, this is, okay, and as I say, I have a lot of variables, so I can throw in a lot of stuff. These are team level regressions with survey and team fixed effect. So the first thing is that is this regression on efficiency, right? So the paper I'm writing has things separately, but so just to have a flavor of what I have. So what this first column says is that not controlling for anything else. A 50% one standard deviation increase in trust within the team is associated with a half of a standard deviation increase in efficiency. So actually, it's very highly correlated. So what happens if I start controlling for stuff? If we go to column 5, where I put in all the controls, what you see is that, for example, just to keep an example, the example of the trust in the team is actually explained because it's correlated with all these other variables that I'm including, but it still remains significant with a 0.12 coefficient. What's strongest of all these variables you see is this culture variable, and everything is standardized. So all that they have the same units in terms of standardized variables. The largest coefficient is this coefficient on culture. On this, the team excels at believing these cultural values that have been, behaviors that have been espoused. But the other measures of what I called clarity are also relevant. So division of labor, how easy communication is, and then interestingly, the structured teams is conditional on everything else. Having the team stable doesn't matter so much, but duration, actually, the longer you've been together, the more efficient you are. Trusting in your tribe lead matters 0. Choosing your team doesn't matter. And then one of the 3 agile feature variables I had, clarity of client needs matters and diversity doesn't matter. So I read this as, look, what matters, what is weighs heavily for this efficiency measure are these clarity elements. It's more like these clarity elements and a little bit of trust. Now contrast this with the next column, which is the column on engagement, right? So this is again the same regressors, but a different dependent variable that now is trying to measure what's the average engagement in the team. And you see very different patterns, right? So for engagement, trust becomes insignificant. It's not statistically different, but it becomes insignificant. If you look at communication, which was very important for efficiency, is not important at all for engagement. So having better communication doesn't matter for engagement. A lot of these culture, which was very important for efficiency, has less than half the size for engagement. Now, what matters for engagement is trusting your tribe lead, having chosen your own team, and some of these other variables. Where we see, and again, this is still very much work in progress, but we see the very different patterns that are emerging depending on what thing I'm putting on the left-hand side. And that makes sense. So we would have expected, if we believe in this clarity word, that clarity matters for efficiency. It's not clear how much important it is for engagement. Maybe it's easier if you communicate better with colleagues, that you're happier at work, etc. But it doesn't seem to have such a strong effect once you control for other dimensions. And if I look at fast response to client needs, which was this other variable that I had that could measure performance, if we look at column 3, we see a very different pattern. Here, culture still matters a lot. These other measures matter very little. What's important for responding fast to client needs are things that here at the bottom, which are what I call the agile features. Is your team designed so that you are end-to-end, you can be self-contained, that you feel you're working on the right topics, and that that it sort of checks the list of a properly designed agile team. But other things matter less. And the last measure, the last performance line was about, it's a collapsed version of the other 3 measures. But again, because what's interesting here is that we have everything together. We see that these features are very strongly correlated with performance, but they matter in different ways for different dimensions of what we care is overall performance. In the end, you want to be efficient, but also add value to the customer and have engaged employees that lower turnover and reduce turnover costs. But these respond to slightly different dimensions, and the clarity dimensions are very strong for efficiency. Let me show you one more thing on this, and then I'll take questions again. So if I collapse these clarity variables that I said are important for efficiency into one variable, and I compare it with trust in the team, right? If we go back to, again, this is a bit of a way of conceptualizing, where it's like, take the clarity variable, culture, communication, division of clarity, and division of labor, and then take my trust in the team, which we saw mattered for efficiency separately, put them together. We saw already clarity is very important for efficiency. This is a very strong effect, right? A 0.6, like a 1 standard deviation increase in clarity is associated with a 0.68. It explains 2/3 of the increase in efficiency. Trust is also important. Now, I was interested as an economist, organizational economists who looks at complementarities, whether these were complementary, right? Is having more clarity in the team less important when you have more trust? Maybe if you really trust others, maybe it's less important to be clear. Or it could be that it actually is more important, that they really reinforce each other, that real value is created when you have both clarity and credibility. And what this shows, when you interact this, what it shows is that there's no complementarity or substitutability at all. Actually, if anything, is a bit substitutes because it's negative, but they're added. These two things are additive. So it's almost like they're operating in a slightly different panels, and they don't reinforce or detract from each other. Okay, I can take a couple of questions. And
so we have 15 minutes left. I propose that we roughly split them, but before we do that, you just presented a whole bunch of tables. I think it would help. I'll tell you something about the questions that are there. You can see them later, but if you guided us towards what bottom line rather than the whole collage you want us to focus on, that might help evaluate which of the questions ought to come first.
Okay, so I think that what comes, I'm curious to hear what people's responses are in general, but I think that what I can take from this is that let me go this one, that the drivers of efficiency are really related to these clarity dimensions much more strongly than what drives engagement. So I'm using this as a, as a way to we know that my outcome measures are not objective measurable things. And I want to see how they evolve, like how do they correlate, and do they correlate in different ways? And what comes so strongly here is that everything that I use that measures efficiency is strongly loaded for, measures clarity is important for efficiency. Other things were less important. For engagement, which is a different variable, for example, things like trusting your tribe lead, do I have trust in your tribe lead, is important, whereas trusting your tribe lead has no relationship with efficiency, which is, the team works on itself. They don't need the tribe lead to operate. So it actually makes sense that it's actually not important. So I think what's important here is that, or what I can conclude by looking at these different variables is that these sub-dimensions matter. And they matter particularly strongly, especially associated with clarity, for explaining one of these performance variables, which is the efficiency variable.
Okay, let me give you 6 things to think about, and you can maybe pick which ones you want to respond to in detail. So the first several of them are at a sort of micro measures level. So Steve Tadelis asked about a placebo test. You are looking at the actual teams and you find that various reports are highly correlated. You want to just check that they aren't correlated if you make up fake teams and compute the same thing. Ann Bartel asks about omitted variables between trust and efficiency, which is sort of where the talk then went. Catherine Shaw says, if we want to figure out who should adopt, we need heterogeneous treatment effects. Although my reaction to that, maybe I'm just a theorist here, is that isn't what I took away from that famous paper by Ikniowski, Shaw, and Pranucci. So I sort of take this paper more in that spirit. A little bit about omitted variables. April Franco asks, do we know who worked together before? So those are all sort of, what are you trying to get out of this, which I think is going to be a continuing thing to think through in your exposition and your choices here. And then pushing on your measures, since they are non-standard. So those are 4 things: placebo test, omitted variables, heterogeneous treatment effects, and work together. Do you want to talk about any of those? And then we have two more.
So very quickly, I think the idea of creating fake teams and seeing how things change is a great idea. So I'll do that. I think that it's a related idea is that using different dependent variables actually show different things. So if everything was correlated, you would find the same types of correlations across everything. But so it's a different kind of placebo test, if you will. But I think it's a great idea. Yes, omitted variable bias. Of course, all I have here, but at least I have fixed effects, at least I have team fixed effects, so I can show you over 5 periods how things vary over time. But anything and I have a lot of controls that are these soft controls, right? I'm not just throwing you in a trust variable or a culture variable. I'm actually, that's the best I can do. I mean, I'm happy to hear other suggestions, but I think that it's really thinking about this with anything that is like per constant non-observed across teams is controlled for. And so if some teams are optimistic, well, that's in the fixed effect. etc. But yes, any omitted variable bias, just tell me which variable you're concerned about, and I'll tell you whether I have anything in there that actually correlates with it, or I don't, and then it's something that that I could address. But this is absolutely, there's no experiment here, but it's pretty hard to get somebody to let you measure all of these things at the same time over 5 periods. So I think that's the best I could do so far. But yes, that is the the big question. And
heterogeneous treatment effects and work together before.
Yes, work together before. I could get some information on that, but the data that I had to get some information on that is only for a subset of teams. So all I know is that the team is stable, and there's not much more that I can do with that. So really the variables that I have that are good are at the team level. And heterogeneous treatment effects, well, I have a lot of effects. Tell me what they need to be heterogeneous on, and I'll try and I'll run it, right? What is the interesting, what is the interesting theory question that could be, before I could run a gazillion things, but I need what is the interesting thing to test? That's what
and then maybe we'll treat these last 2 as comments in order to get you back to finishing up in about 8 minutes, and then we'll have our 15-minute Q&A. And they're from Yvonne and Heskey. So Yvonne says, there's a difference between trust versus trustworthiness, which seems interesting. And Heskey says, what's the role of leaders here, who, by the way, might be the ones about whom we're interested in trustworthiness questions, leading to a high measure of trust in the team. So why don't we leave those issues for the Q&A period and let you take about 8 minutes to finish up here.
All right. So in another question that could have been asked is, is this specific to agile teams or not, right? Is this, isn't trust important in any organization? Isn't culture important in any organization? So the nice thing about the teams is that I can really have these fixed effects. I can have these mini organizations and how they evolve over time. I also surveyed HR and finance as part of the same survey waves. So these are people who are staying in the functional hierarchy. And I don't have I have most of the answers for them, but what I'm showing you here is take the same survey, and now I want to see whether HR and finance people respond differently to the questions from these teams. The challenge with HR and finance is that I don't have well-defined 8 people teams or 10 people teams. I have subgroups, so I have another, I think it's another 20 subgroups of HR and finance. By different groups, but these are the little parts of the hierarchy. So I don't have these as clear teams as in the first part. But in any case, so for example, if you look at what I do here, column 3 is I say, well, now I'm going to regress trust in the team, and then the interaction of trust in the team from being in an agile team. And what we see is that trust in the team matters in the agile teams as much as in the, so for everybody, the base category is, it's 0.157 and highly correlated. There's no additional value of trust by being in an agile team. So trust matters for agile teams, but it matters for everybody. So trust is important across the organization. For a lot of the variables, this was the case. So that things that I just said, this is important in this setting where I have these micro organizations that I can look at independently. It was also valuable at this. So let me show you some of the differences, or highlight some of the differences. There's a lot of numbers here. So one is that in engagement, I saw before, I didn't highlight it, but is that trusting the team is important for engagement in Agile, but not in the rest. So trusting other members of your team, and maybe this is because these are larger teams, doesn't matter for feeling good in the organization in the functions, but it is in Agile. The key difference between the 2 teams came here. The 2 groups came here. In the non-agile part, in the functional hierarchy, easy communication doesn't matter for efficiency. Whereas it matters, we saw that before, in the agile teams. And both seem to be important for engagement in the other one. But here's the one, while a lot of the things that matter in one matter in the other, the big difference that came up is that this having good communication within the teams is actually important in Agile in ways that is not as important in the functional hierarchies. So that's one thing I'd highlight from that. And in the interest of time, just let me jump to the last things that I did. So this, a lot of this is actually predicated on how teams respond, and the one concern is that maybe these teams are completely independent of the rest of the organization. We don't know what's going on. We don't know how to assess them. How do we actually? And I showed you before that the answers were highly correlated. And what this organization is looking for is to having high-performing teams. So this is something I asked the teams is, I asked the tribe leads and the agile coaches, as I showed you before, how do you perceive these teams on efficiency, on culture, on a couple of other dimensions? And then what I was able to do is I asked them, each of these tribe leads and agile coaches, I asked them, what do you think this team is a high-performing team? So the last thing I'll show you is and again, this is not a lot of observations, it's the people who answered my survey, but I think it's interesting. If you ask the tribe lead, is this a high-performing team? And I regress their answer on high-performing team on their own answers on efficiency, time to market, and culture, you see that the thing they rate mostly to decide whether this person is a high-performing team is efficiency, but they put similar weights on culture and then time to market, or smaller, but some weight. If I ask the same question of an agile coach, is this a high-performing team? The agile coach that says yes is putting all the weight on culture. So it's on their own answer. And again, this is saying, it looked like they were able to assess each other, but when you ask what is a high-performing team of these different people, they weigh in the answer of a high-performing team different dimensions in different ways. So that's another thing to see. And I mean, it would be great to have had more data on this, but it's good to see how these people are rating different things differently. So to summarize the results, we see improvements in things over time, but not for everything. These drivers of performance are, clarity and credibility, trust are useful. Clarity items dominate, trust is important. There's no complementarity between this. And we see different outcomes in efficiency, speed versus engagement. Are they similar to non-agile? The key difference is are they similar to non-agile? The key difference that I see is in agile is communication. And in spite of this extreme flattening, different parts of the organization have similar perspective on what's going on. So if I go to the bigger picture, what I take from this is that really it allows me to go a little bit beyond the hard practices that have been well documented before. And I don't know, I didn't point this out, but actually these soft practices explain a lot of the variation in these outcome variables that I'm looking at. So arc squares of 0.5. The relational contract is core to these modern organizations. Okay, I'm having like a meltdown down here, I hear.
That's fun.
Yeah, that's multitasking. So the relational contract is to these modern organizations, but it's something that's hard to measure. And it speaks to a lot of different questions on why don't firms adopt superior practice, because these things are difficult, but we see that actually they seem to be quite important. And with these new forms of organization that are all about the culture, all about the common understanding, all about the coordination, when you have much fewer, you don't have the decision makers on the hierarchy making those calls, is important. And I think that, this is an attempt again, but it's important and possible to study these complex production functions. And if we're not a little bit wild in trying to think, how do I measure performance in an environment that has this complexity, we'll stay behind the rest of the world looking at organizations, because this is where we need to get some traction on, I think. And this is similar to a paper I like a lot by Hoffman and Tadelis, where they try to do that using the subjective evaluations. But I think we need to find creative ways to get at this. And so this is my attempt. And yeah.
Fantastic. Maria, thank you. There are 66 other people on mute, but I'm going to clap just to say thank you very much. Everybody else can virtually clap. Lovely. Also, your powers of concentration are remarkable. I kept checking the mute buttons, and everybody except you and I were on mute. So either it's my kid or it's yours. So there you go. So let me encourage you to open up the participants panel and run the Q&A from here on, except that I will give you 3 questions from the chat that I think would be too hard for you to pull out. And then after that, if you want to ask a question, we'll stick around for 15 minutes, and please use the raise your hand function, and Maria can call on you. So 3 things that are related to things that came up before, and you'll love the chat comments more generally. So Berger Wernerfeld said, I see how this works for finite projects. Help me think about whether it should be used for ongoing operations. A little bit in that spirit, Catherine Shaw tried to give you something to look for heterogeneous treatment effects on. Should I think of this working for complex situations or simple or both? And Oriana Bandiera came back to some of the selection issues, asking, okay, now you have this measure called choose teams. And I think that has both empirical implications and managerial implications. So there are identification issues there, maybe, and also practical ones. So I don't know if those are issues you want to take up now. In the bottom of the chat, there are things from Morton and Heskey, but at least when I'm speaking, it's too hard to read the chat. So why don't we, if you want to talk about ongoing operations or complex or simple operations or what it means to choose a team, you could, or you could just switch to raised hands. And
so for the projects, so I think that this is best suited to setups where, as it's designed, setups where you have to do incremental innovation, right? That's the purpose is that, and so there's ongoing operations, and one question is how do you maintain stuff after you've done the initial effort? So that is the projects are designed as finite projects that where incremental adaptation and innovation is important, and so that's where it's best suited to, especially with the form in which they're adopting. For things that are more ongoing, there's organizations that operate in a similar fashion, that are more about, I don't know if you know the Gary Hamel case on Morningstar, which is the tomato processing and manufacturing plant. Well, this is a manufacturing environment where they've done something similar, not exactly how I described it, but with the similar principles to actually create products, and they managed to do it in this way. But in the restricted to what I've described, it's very much like that. On the complexity of when it's more valuable, is it in complex? Yeah, this is more valuable the higher the complexity, right? These places where you think, where I think this is more valuable, I cannot test that because I don't think I'm going to have enough variation across teams to do that. But in places where the bureaucracy of a hierarchy fails is where this adaptation is likely to be, if it works well, to adapt in a similar way. Now, the other piece that hasn't come up where it's important is what happens to economies of scale, which is something that organizations do, right? And so here it's where economies of scale are going to be harder to realize because the coordinations that is needed for economies of scale to be realized are lesser. So this is more valuable in places where this adaptation is more important. And I did not write, so maybe Oriana, you can tell me live, what is the question, if you're still there, about team selection. So I have this variable on choosing teams, and yes, this is an endogenous thing, who chooses what, absolutely. So but I don't know if there was any more.
You're good. Morton, are people able to unmute themselves? Oriana?
I unmuted myself, so you can also hear my kids screaming in the background. So we can do a race who screams louder. No, sorry, I didn't mean it as an identification because you have fixed effects and you have variation in choose teams. It means that some team members have chosen the team and others haven't. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to see whether being able to choose the team is actually more important when you're in an
Sorry. Oriana, I'm trying to unmute you. I just can't find you here. Everybody.
I can unmute myself.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry. Everybody
I have
else.
Autonomy.
Good. I'm sorry. Everybody else went off mute, so that seemed like too much. I interrupted you. My apologies.
No worries. Sorry, I don't know whether you heard me or not, Maria.
No.
Oh, no, okay. So what was I saying is that if you can estimate these choose teams variable, it means that you have variation in it within a team. So that means that some people have chosen the team and others were assigned to it.
Correct.
Now, being able to choose your team can be motivating in and of itself. And this motivation effect might be actually more important if you're in the agile teams.
Yeah, true. let's see.
So
I don't have the variable. I don't.
Interacted, and
yeah.
it wasn't.
I don't have the variable choose team interacted because there's some variables that in the functional organization you don't choose your there's not such a thing of choosing teams. So there's some things that that did not ask in the functional organization. Is that
it only happens in the agile team?
I only have it for agile teams, yeah. Because if you're yeah.
That by itself is a sign that it only matters in the agile teams.
Yeah.
So Maria, we have about 10 minutes. You have Morten and Heskey in the chat and Guido raising his hand.
Okay, can I let you choose because I'm stuck with this. I don't know how to go to the because I guess I should end show and all of this. Since you've been doing such a beautiful job, I'll let you feed me either choose the people you want to hear from or feed me the questions.
Okay, so Morten is re-asking, and that's I think a good thing to pick up questions that lots of people want to ask about. Which functions in the bank get put into these teams. And so, Morten, you want to come back and ask that question?
I think, am I on? Yes. So Maria, I mean, it's going a little bit back to what is the purpose of doing this? Is it just to attract the new customers, the hot areas, the online credit cards, whatever the new products are? I mean, this is a bank, so I assume that the basic things of finance, risk management, wealth management is probably not put into the agile system, right?
So initially, no, but over time they've extended this to many other parts of the organization, and they've adapted it to different ways. So now they've extended it to other countries and other parts of the organization. So at one point they even introduced the branches. So branches went some form of agile. Of course, they don't do daily. I mean, some of the things that are done here are not done, but their view is that they would change everything. I also have asked them about the functions. How do the functions adapt? Of course, they're not in agile teams, but they've adopted some of the agile form of project management, and the culture changes throughout the organization. But it's harder to identify these isolated teams in some of these other functions, which goes also to the point of Berger earlier about what can be done in these mini teams. You can have a lot of these sort of overall principles, but not necessarily be in these mini teams.
So Heskey is telling me in the chat that he thinks he's asking two separate questions. I think they're interestingly related, so I'm going to pool them. Before we mentioned briefly that he was asking about leaders, and now later he's asking, is the organization doing anything to enhance some of your independent variables, which it should if it understood the results you're getting and took them at face value. Mm-hmm. So I suppose the organization could do hierarchically flat interventions to increase trust or trustworthiness. And this gets us back to Yvonne's distinction between those two as well. Maya too, interesting that trust in whom matters rather than trust in general. So, right, what do you know about the organization trying to amp up these effects? And in particular, every social structure has at least an informal hierarchy. So saying more about the role of the person who is at least informally or maybe formally at the tops of these little groups would be very interesting.
Yes, so they were very, so I was reporting this data back and some of these correlations they saw when the data were very fresh. This is something that is actually very important. And in fact, the existence of these agile coaches, that's a lot of how this cultural thing comes through, right? Agile coaches are there to assist teams when things fail, and the breakdowns are not technical breakdowns, are interpersonal communication breakdowns. So a lot of this happens through the agile coaches. And they've done these pizza sessions and all kinds of culture creation, communication creation kind of initiatives are very common to create this common sense of we're in this together. So they work on this a lot, as many organizations do, but them too. Then on, now I forgot the second part, which was the, can you remind me what the second part?
You're in the ballpark. What are they doing? Trust and trustworthiness, informal or formal?
Oh yes, the leadership, exactly. So I don't know about enough to know about informal leaders. Well, actually I do know. So something that has come up, I don't have data for this, but it's something that's come up in the conversations, is that when the organization, when they felt under pressure, what tends to happen is that an informal hierarchy in the team emerges, right? And that's something that they were actively trying to fight back. When when we're scrambled, what do we go back to? What we know is hierarchy from when we were children in school with the teacher standing in front of us. So so that's when the informal hierarchy belongs, is like who has the skills, who can coordinate. So that's when this informal hierarchy I know has crept in. The coordinator is the product owner, and they have a bit of a different job. They should be understood that they're facilitators and not bosses, but they actually are these informal. So that's a place where managing the fact that they are not the boss, but they still have this coordinating role was a tricky something that I remember hearing was tricky, right? It's like, you're the coordinator, you're not the boss. And the fact that, again, we're so ingrained to what a leader having this mentoring, but decision maker, top-down authority, performance assessor role. This in fact, what happens here is that it's broken down into different people, all these roles. But yeah.
Okay. How about for our last question? We have about 2 minutes. Guido Friebel has been very politely having his hand up in the chat here. So Guido, you can unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
I'm amazed about my restraint. Thank you very much. So I have 2 questions that pick up some of the topics that came up before. And one of the things is the movement of people. And I would like to see something more systematic here, because in principle, people could leave the team to go to another team because they don't like this team. So then I'm sorting myself into another team. They could go somewhere else into a non-agile part of the company, or they could leave altogether. And all these forces will be important to see how team specific cultures may or may not emerge. And currently we're looking into a transitional phase, but we would like to see whether something more stable emerges over time. And precisely like you say, some of these teams may become more hierarchical over time, while some may continue being real teams. And related to this, one of the benchmarks that you talked about is the traditional organization. The other benchmark is the very innovative IT organization, in which you have a project pipeline, everything is measured, and people turn around different teams all the time. And I would like to see some more systematic discussion whether a traditional company can actually mimic these more IT-based, project-based organizations.
Yeah, on the movement of people, it's a great question. I don't have access to rich enough data to do that. From what I showed you, I don't know who these people are, so I cannot tell you anything. I do have some data on people changing, but it's not I don't know, maybe insufficient to look at all the dimensions you highlighted, unfortunately. And I mean, I think what's unique about this is a bank. Right? It's not, this is not I mean, it has a lot of an IT component like many, but this is no different from, from a lot of services companies. It's not, this is not Apple, it's not just creating digital or it's not Apple, maybe Apple, it's not Google. It is actually ultimately in a services environment, in an industry. Think about this is a bank. I'll say it again. It's not a very traditional environment. Like I'll tell you an anecdote on this. What do you think about a bank? A banker is somebody in a big head office with a cushy leather sofa in a corner office, and that's the pinnacle of achievement in a bank, is having reached that corner office. When they did this, the CEO, the COO gave up their corner offices and were hot desking with everybody. So this is the mindset change, that they went from the big corner office with views that was the pinnacle of your career to actually we're all the same again, even if I'm the chief operating officer or the chief executive officer of the bank, because they want to instill this idea of flatness, of we're all in this together, transparency, etc. So this article I wrote with Eve does actually, we try to think a bit more about when is this appropriate, when is it not appropriate. Again, going back to Berger's question earlier, but you know, it's possible outside where we've traditionally thought, I think, which is very restricted to IT, but it's inspired a lot from what has happened in IT.
Maria, my phone thinks we are at 1 hour, 14 minutes and 56 seconds. You're perfect. Thank you. I'm going to unmute everybody so that we can all clap. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you.
And go to the homepage for the seminar at the top of the chat that Morten posted, and you can sign up for future festivities. Thank you, everybody. Hope you stay well.